Hello everyone, this is Christian Mount Exciton Interactive, and in this video we are going to pick up where we left off in dealing with the info section or the validator side of our component. So just to remind us where we left off, we have created the ability, at least for now, if you focus an input, it will change the color of the corresponding info page on the right hand side. And of course you can move back and forth between each component and it animates correctly for now. So again, what we want to do or end up with is, if you look at the example, if you focus an input, there's a slow transition from, say, the default page to whatever input is highlighted. Then if you are focused, and then if you move to another input, there's a slow transition to that. So that's where we're going to end up by the time we were done with this video. Again, as usual, you can find a link to the article for this video in the description below. And let us get started here. And the first thing that we're going to do is that we need to have access to, if we look, we need to have access to the welcome or the default info page, right? So let's go back to Visual Studio and we'll start with the authenticator.component.ts file. Come in here, there it is. So as usual, we're going to create another field here. And we'll call it, let's put it down here. Private default, and I just called it default info DOM. It's of type HTML element. Starts off null. Perfect. And now we'll go to the ng after view init method. Scroll down here to the bottom. And I'm just going to set that. So this dot default info DOM is equal to this dot. We'll use the DOM reader. And we'll do the find child by ID. We'll pass in the native element. So element ref dot native element. And we've already specified in the previous video the default info ID. Just to be sure that we actually have that DOM element, we'll just say this default DOM. Save that, turn to our browser, and before I even get back here, we see that we have the reference. We'll turn back to Visual Studio. Can get rid of that console log statement. And let's see, the next thing that we are going to do, let's scroll up here a little bit. So we're going to have, right now, if we go to if we go to blur input, we're just making this call to the hide info from the control pair collection. We have the same deal. Well, we don't have the same deal. Yeah, we do. Focus input and show info there. We're going to go ahead and make a couple of helper methods to deal with the showing and the hiding. So let's scroll down here towards the bottom and create a couple private ones. So private hide info, I think is what I called it. Let us make sure, yes, hide info. And it's going to take in a key, so the control key and the string. While we're at it, we're just going to stub out the show info. It's going to take a key and a string. Now that we've created them, let's go back up and make sure that I don't forget anything. So I'm going to go back to the ng after view init, and I'm going to make a call to the show info method now that we have access to the default info. So this dot show info, and of course we need a key. The way that we're going to know that we're going to deal with the default and not one of the controls info is by passing in null. So we'll just pass in null. All right. We'll go down to the blur input. I'm going to remove this hide info statement here and just say this dot hide info and pass the key. We'll go down to the focus input and do the same thing. Get rid of this. In this case though, we'll just say show info, pass in the key. Perfect. Let's go back to the hide info that we started creating here. So as I said, we know that if key is equal to null, that we're dealing with the default. So what we want to do is say this default info dom.animate. And this is the reason why we moved the effects and the timing to the components TypeScript file instead of the control group where we started. And we'll say this hide info effect, this info timing, and we want to just return after that. Otherwise, we'll do the whole thing that we did before, the control pair collection hide info. We have to figure out which one it is. We'll say this key to group ID map, and we'll pass in the key to that. So that'll take care of the hide info, and now we'll do the same deal essentially for the show. So we'll say if key is equal to null, this default info dom.animate, this show info effect, this info timing, return. Otherwise, this underscore control pair collection show info, this key map ID, and then the key. Save that. Perfect. Go back to the browser. So since we're making that initial call to the show info and we're passing in null, we have the default starting highlighted, which is good. Of course, now if we highlight the username, we'll have both the welcome and the username. But still, we haven't broken the behavior that we had previously. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And what I'm going to do is go back up and create another private field up here. We will call this one private and is default info active. It's a Boolean equals false. Of course, it starts off true. I don't care. It doesn't matter which one we use. We'll see here in a second why. So we are going to use that. Let's just use it. Well, we'll go in order. So let me go back down also to the blur input. So one thing that I want to adjust on the blurring is that if you notice we're on whatever input, we go to the next one, the changing of the current one back to gray and the changing of the new one to yellow happen at the same time, and we want to, the little transition pause between them kind of thing. So let's go to the blur input. We'll change this down here. So so what I want to do is, so we have this animation, this hide, so we're hiding it. So we'll just say const animation equals that. And then what we want to do is, I guess we're not dealing with the blurring between them. What we're doing here is, so if I blur the input, I want to have the default shown, right? So if I'm on username, assuming that the default isn't actually shown now, or yellow, when I go off, when I remove focus, when I blur it, I want it to go back to the default. So we're going to grab this animation, and then we'll say animation. So this is the animation for hiding the current input. So we'll say animation.on. Oh, I probably messed up again, right? It's going to tell me that this is a void. So we need to go to the hide info. Yep, the ones we just created, or the one that we just created. What I want to do is to say return these. So I'm going to return this, and we'll remove that. And we'll return this. Now I can go back up to blur input, back up. So now we have an animation. We can say animation dot on finish. I want to set this thing. And what we'll do is to say this dot show info and null, because we want to show the default. All right, that takes care of the blur. Let's go back down to the hide info here, because we're going to need it here as well. What we need to know whether or not the default page is being shown. And so let's go to the hide info. And what we want here is, so if we're hiding the default, then we'll set the this.isDefault active to false. If we go to the show info, of course, what we want to do is to say this.isDefault active. We'll set it to be true here, since we're inside the keys equal to null if statement. Now what we want to do is to modify what's happening down here. Okay, so what we're going to do is change this to be a switch. So switch. What we're going to switch on is default info active flag that we just created. Of course, we have a couple possibilities. Case is true, and I'm going to just return after them. And we have case false. Return. Of course, we're going to get rid of this. We'll just comment it out. What I'm going to do down here, this being JavaScript, somehow, some way along the way as possible that we can set that flag to be something other than true or false, undefined, null, something. So we'll just throw an error if we get down to this point and we found that the flag is not true or false. And what I'll do, actually, what we'll do is we'll just take this statement here, move it up to the false case. This is our first attempt here. So if we're on a control, then the default info active should be false. So we're on another control, say the username, and now we want to show the password. But the true case is the default info is shown. What we'll say is const animation that equals this dot hide info. What we're going to do is hide the default information, and then we'll say animation dot on finish again, and we'll say this dot control pair collection dot show info, and this dot key, and pass the key to it. Perfect. So then at the moment at least we should have the soft transition from the default to whatever control is being highlighted or being focused. So we start off default. We'll highlight the focus, the username, and it has that soft transition from the default to the username. Let's remove the focus and we'll return back to the default. So the same thing happens with the password. So that's all working correctly. Now, of course, if we have the username highlighted and we go to the next one, we're managing to, show the default and the passwords info. So let's start dealing with that now. What happens here, right, is that we have, if we go to the blur, what's happening is we're hiding whichever one. So if we're on the username, we're hiding the username. Once the username is finished being hidden, we're also showing the default. At the same time, we're focusing another control, so it's showing its information. So we need to somehow say, don't do this. So in order to do that, we're going to go back up to the top here and create another field all about them. And let's see, what do I call it? Probably right in here. So private and default info timeout. I'm going to give it the type of any, having a little bit of issue finding getting the correct type for a timeout to work. But we're going to use that now. Now we'll go back down to the blur input. So excuse me. Instead of using this animation, let's just get rid of this. And what I'm going to do in that case here is just say this default info timeout is equal to set timeout. No, set timeout. Inside that timeout, I'm going to do this. right? And of course we need a time for the timeout to work for, and we have one. We're going to just set this to this dot info timing dot duration, but we're going to add just a little bit to it, so we'll add 100 milliseconds to it. So we're going to hide whatever, so say the username. We're going to set a timeout where if the timeout expires, we're going to show the default. If we're going to show another key, or we focus another input before that happens, what we're going to do is clear that timeout. So let's go to the show info, and we'll simply come in here and say clear timeout, and the timeout that we want to clear is the default. Let me save that. Alright, so we're back. We'll focus the username, remove the focus, it goes back, go here, and now we'll go to the password, and of course it does not show the welcome, it doesn't change the color for the welcome. We'll go back to the username. Downside, at least at the moment, you can see is that again the transitions are abrupt except for the default. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and actually we'll fix a few things here. So what we want to end up with are the info pages to be stacked one on top of the other. So let's go into our style sheet, so authenticator.component.scss file. We'll go down to the bottom, we'll say .authenticator. What else is it? .info pages. I want the position for the info pages to be relative. And then if it's an info inside of there, I want its position to be absolute. I want to set its opacity to begin with to be 0. And I want those infos to be expanded to take up the entire horizontal width of the container. So we'll say left 0, right 0. Save that. Go back to our authenticator.component.ts file. Let's adjust our actual keyframes here. So we don't want the color being changed anymore. We want opacity. And for hiding it, opacity will go from 1 to 0. And for showing, we'll go from 0 to 1. Go ahead and save that. I think we should be at a point to see it. It's rebuilding. And good. So now it's shown. We have the default. Go to the username. Back to default. Username. Go to password. And it's more apparent there, right? We can see that there's no nice transition between the two. They appear over top of each other. So let's go back to the TypeScript file. We are going to fix that by coming in here. Surprise, surprise, creating another field here. So private, I'm going to call it blur hide animation. Animation. It's going to start off being null. And of course, based on the name, we're going to know that we have to go to the onBlur input. And now we'll set this animation to be this dot, what do I call it, blur hide animation. Perfect. The thing is that we have to know whether or not this hide info animation has finished or not. So we'll go to the show info method. And of course we have to go into the false category here, and what I'm going to do is to say so if this dot blur hide animation, if that's not equal to null, and this dot blur hide animation dot play state, if that's not equal to finished, then what I want to do inside here is to say this dot blur hide animation dot on finish. set that to this dot control pair collection dot show info, and we're going to show key pair group the key that's being passed in. Otherwise, I'm going to come down here and just say else. We'll convert this to else. We'll put this inside. Alright, let's save that. Turn to our browser. Everything's up to date. So we focus the username, remove the focus. Nice transition back to the default. Test here. We go from username to password, and we have the same nice transition going back and forth to all of the inputs. You'll notice one thing will happen here, so I'm just going to real quick go through them, and you can see that there is something happens with the validators themselves. This doesn't seem to happen with the headings. If the user goes screaming through them, then they do mess up here. I think it has to do with basically me setting the on finish. I should probably compose it with the previous one, but for me, it's not an issue. No one's going to come in here and just go through as fast as they can. Plus, it's self-correcting. If you actually go back through all of the inputs, at some point in time, you'll see it'll sort of double blink, and then it'll correct itself. Like I said, it's not going to happen. You can refresh the browser, and it'll fix itself as well. So for me, that's not an issue, at least for now. Maybe I'll work on the correction later on. But at least the animation is working correctly over here. And since this video is probably a little bit short here, we're going to do a little bit of fixing of these links at the bottom of the page. Let's go back to Visual Studio. First thing I'm going to modify is the template. So the authenticator.component.pug file. Scroll down to the bottom of it. We have these links here, and what we're going to do here is we need to show them conditionally, right? So on the need to log in, so if you already have accounts, we're going to say that we're going to show the need to log in if you're registering. I did it backwards in my notes. So if you're registering, then we'll say star ngif, and that is register. And next we'll come down here and we'll say star ngif equals double quotes and is login. So if you're logging in, if the person's logging in and they need to register an account, this link will show up. If they're registering and they need to log in, this link will show up. Next, we also need to tell it what the link or the URL is. So we'll put the parentheses on our anchor tags. We're going to bind to the href attribute. So we use our square brackets. And we're going to bind to, so already have an account, they need to register. We're going to say register URL. Same deal down here, parentheses, square brackets, bind to the href, and we're binding the login URL. I'm going to save that. Go back to my types, or actually first what we're going to modify is the authenticator-http service class. And what I want is to basically say I need to have access to these these URLs, so we'll say public. If we can type, change the login and the register URLs to public. And now we'll go back to the authenticator.component.ts file. And we need to give our template access to those. So we'll say public get login URL. And we'll say return. And those are static, so we just have to say the authenticator HTTP service.login URL. We also need to say public get register URL and return authenticator HTTP service.register URL. Save that. We'll return to the browser, and we see that we're on login. We have the link saying need to register an account, and if I hover on it, I see that I'm binding the wrong. So if I click on that, I go right to the login URL, which is where I'm at. Of course, now it's messed up, so we'll just rebuild here. So login, so that's correct. So it must have messed up the need to register if login. So the person's on the login, why would I need to put the login URL? So register and login. Save that. Everything's built. Go back to the browser. Yes, I know. So bundle rebuilding going on there. All right. It's probably the first time I've seen it and decided I need to rebuild a whole bunch of times here. But at least we're showing now that we have the account register link working. So if I click on that, changes me to the account register and shows login. If I click on that, it'll take me to login. So everything seems to be working acceptably for the info side of things. So I think that'll do it for this video. Of course, I'd like to say again, thank you for taking the time to watch the video. And if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later.